can. Chase, you can hear me okay on that? Okay.
We can hear you good. Yep.
Great. Thank you for joining today. Sam, our host, could not be here today. He wishes you all well and aloha wishes to you. At DataJoin, we help connect behavioral data, and we've hosted these meetings over the past several months, and happy to gather together and collaborate on ideas. We met Jeff Chasin, who's going to be our speaker today, many, many years ago. And any of you who know Jeff know a couple of things about him. One, that he's really great at getting answers and connecting you with the right people at Adobe to get answers. And one of the strengths that we love about Jeff is that he's just a great networker and collaborator. And we've loved working with Jeff over the years, and pleased to have him today sharing on a very important topic. So I'm not going to blab too much other than welcome Jeff and thank him for joining and prepping this. And we can jump right into Adobe Experience Platform Web SDK. I know there's a poll that Chase mentioned, so if you haven't had a chance to participate in that, go ahead and look at the top under polls and select that and participate there. And we'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nate. I noticed there were, like you said, we've known him for many, many, many years. So that's just a dig on me being old. I know. I picked up on that. Just say.
I was going to say more years than we've had fingers and toes, but that's not quite true. But yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Maybe just
I was picking up what you were putting down. So thanks to everybody who joined the call, and for the folks in Lehigh. Today we're going to talk about Adobe Experience Platform Web SDK and data collection for the purpose of better customer experiences. All of these analytics tools and dashboards and reports and analyses and insights and all of these buzz phrases that we deal with and terms and concepts that we deal with in digital marketing, customer experience management, personalization, testing and optimization. All of it really starts at the point where we're collecting data about what our visitors are doing, where they're struggling, where there are things they're attracted to, things they're not as attracted to as we would like, and in order to sort of tune our efforts and tune our investments, things where we should double down, things where we should trim back, things where we should.
Can you please mute?
Oh yeah, can everyone make sure they have mute on? Thank you.
And so that all starts with the data. Is where I was going with this, right? We can't do any of these great things, and we can't get the value out of all of the time and the money we invest in all of this work. We can't get that value unless we have the right data at the right time in front of the right people. So that's, at the end of the day, all of this talk about plumbing, which is how I sort of lovingly refer to a lot of this work of implementing data collection. That's what makes it worthwhile, is to get the insights and make things better for our customers and our business. Anyone who's seen me go through slides before, I try very hard not to read them to you, and I'll try even harder to go fast through them. If I go too fast, feel free to speak up. I can't really see the folks in the chat pod or the room very easily, so feel free just to unmute and just a shout out or just throw something heavy at my head, and happy to take questions. We will have some room at the end for Q&A. If it's the last thing I do, I'll make some space there at the end to talk about things maybe that we didn't cover, or if you have questions. So we're just going to do a quick background, little overview, sort of set the stage. We'll talk very quickly about project plans relative to data collection. Then we'll get into the meat in the sandwich, as they say, implementation work. We'll give you some resources for follow-up and further learning and reference, and then we'll do some Q&A. And one disclaimer, just before we dive in, This is not everything you ever wanted to know for any use case and any solution and any integration regarding the Web SDK. I can't do that in 45 minutes. I don't know if anybody can. There's a lot of moving parts here, as I think all of you know, when we're talking about data collection, especially for the Web SDK, when we're talking about browsers and client-side sites and apps and client-side implementations. So I'm not going to cover every single thing, but if you have something you want to bring up at the end, please save it for the Q&A, and we'll see if we can cover it. So that said, we'll jump into the quick overview and background section. There's only 4,000 plus slides left, so just hang with me. We should be done by sometime after dinner. So I think anybody who's been around Adobe products for more than a few weeks has probably seen something like this. Some people call it the layer cake view, sort of the bottom here for platform, the middle layer of applications, and then the top layer here in red of our categories of products. Sort of one way to look at the Adobe Experience Cloud, the different solutions and services that interact when you're implementing our technologies. The platform layer down here at the bottom, this gray, is where we're going to spend most of our time today, obviously talking about data and how we collect that data in order to have that data available in any of the services or applications that we need. So whether that's Adobe Analytics or Customer Journey Analytics, Real-Time CDP, etc. You don't need me to read you all of these names. I'm sure most of you are familiar. But in terms of a category of products and a category of work that we get involved in, data insights and activation is sort of a bread and butter topic, right? So we have to collect the data so we can get insights about what our customers are experiencing, and we have to send that data to the tools that we're using. Every customer has a different mix of solutions, a different mix of technology stacks, Adobe and non-Adobe products alike. And some folks in the room may be thinking from the perspective of a particular integration or use case or product, and that's totally okay, because we're going to talk about collecting data for regardless of where that data is going to end up. So just to set the stage, if anyone has been working on the web for any length of time, has probably heard about the early days of your hit counter that your quote-unquote webmaster could install. And thankfully, we have come a long way from these little tools and little counters that sit like a slot machine sort of at the bottom of your page and increment as you hit the page. If anybody's old enough to remember any of these images, we have come a long way. And really, the reason I put this up here is not so much to date myself, but that browsers have come a very long way since the days of these very early, hey, I got a hit, somebody looked at my page. Browsers have come a very long way where they're full-on application environments and a whole lot more. So the only reason I bring this up for context is we are working in the browser when we're talking about the Web SDK, and there are a lot of relevant topics to cover, in terms of the context that sets for what we can and can't do and how we might do it in an efficient way. Data collection, connecting data from one place to another, setting up your data supply chain, your data pipeline. It's not easy to do for a large business with lots of different websites, lots of different apps on different devices. We have a variety of ways to get data to Adobe. Today, we're going to spend most of our time talking about the Web SDK, but from websites or mobile apps or even servers through server-to-server APIs, a variety of ways to get that behavioral data to Adobe and non-Adobe products alike. At the point of collection where the visitor is actually taking the action that we care about for our websites, whether it's a conversion event or a video that they watched as an example, we're sending that data to the Adobe Experience Platform Edge Network. Basically, if you think of it as Adobe's servers out on the internet, those servers all together, just globally distributed and in different nodes, different countries, they make up really our edge network. And so when that data hits an Adobe server, we describe it as hitting the edge. And the edge performs a lot of different functions, but without spending too much time on it, you can think of it as a big, sort of a gigantic industrial strength decisioning engine and router, among other things. It's really, from some perspectives, a gateway, and then sending that data wherever it needs to go, whether it's an Adobe or a non-Adobe product. Another way to think about that is if you've ever done Adobe Analytics or Audience Manager or Target implementations on the client side before, you remember that there were, 1 or 2 invites in your email inbox that would show up, maybe 3 or 4 or 7. But in the old days, you would get different invites, you would get different code, you would get different docs, and you deploy different data collection libraries at measurement and DIL code and AMO tags and ATJS, et cetera. All of these different libraries for collecting data for specific solutions and then sending that data to Adobe. And to say the least, it was a bit chatty over the wire, as they say. Lots of different requests and responses. And what we've done is we've streamlined that. And so the Web SDK is, for those that don't know, SDK, Software Development Kit. Some people have other more meme-like names for that acronym, but the SDK gives you a suite of tools, really, to handle your data collection, to send that data to Adobe. You get one invite. You take the Web SDK and you configure and deploy it. You get your key value pairs, your whatever something equals something. So page name equals home, page name equals product detail, category equals product detail, et cetera, et cetera. And you send that data up to our edge network. And then from our edge, from our servers, that data goes where it needs to go, whether it's an Adobe or non-Adobe solution. So much more streamlined, much less back and forth over the wire. And the code itself is a lot more optimized for modern browsers. Back in the DTM days and back in the Adobe Analytics extension days and even further back than that, excuse me, there was a lot of code in there for legacy browsers, believe it or not, IE7, going way back. So there was a lot of code bloat in some of those legacy libraries that's been stripped out, and we're able to take advantage of more modern browser APIs, browser features with the platform Web SDK. So in data collection, there's a link here down at the bottom, Adobe Lee or LY. These are our short links, if you will. And so you'll see some of these in the presentation. At the end, there is a resources slide with a bunch of links, and I'll also paste into the Teams a list of resources links that you can have to follow up after the presentation. But the main data collection documentation is at this link here at the bottom. What's included in data collection, the platform Web SDK, which we're discussing today, and a variety of other tools that work with data collection. And we're gonna look at those as we go through the session. We'll look at tags, our client-side tag management system, formerly known as Launch. So if you hear me say Launch, I'm not trying to confuse you. I just haven't made the switch mentally quite yet. Some people I know still say Omniture, but not many. That's our client-side tag management system. It is one of the ways, but not the only way, to deploy the platform Web SDK in your website or your web apps. Platform Edge Network we mentioned, data streams we're going to look at. It's really just a way to configure where is the data going to go and which solutions do we want to turn on. Great feature. XDM schemas, which gives us the structure of our data. So is page name going to be a string or an object or an array or something else? The platform debugger, which is a browser extension that helps you validate and troubleshoot and QA your implementations. The platform assurance, which is part of debugger, but also gives us additional tools in mobile contexts. And then also part of data collection is the mobile SDK and the Edge Network Server API, which they're grayed out because we're not going to cover those today, but lot of information in the community and Experience League documentation about if you're looking for mobile data collection or server-to-server data transfers. So this, pretty much what you see on the screen now, is part of what we call data collection, a suite of tools that make it easier for you to implement our stuff when we're talking about implementing in a browser. Where you can find it is in the when you log into Experience Cloud, the menu selector, you choose data collection. Also on the main page up at the top, data collection, and there's home page. Data collection is, some people were confused about who has access to different parts of data collection. So what is on this screen here, every digital experience customer has access to. So if you're an analytics customer, a target customer, AEM customer, any digital experience product that you own gives you access for no additional cost to data collection. And so you can find that here. In the left rail is the main navigation for platform and for most of our solutions. When you get to data collection, the data collection section, you see there's links for tags, some of these other things. So tags, again, our client-side tag management system. App services is for mobile app data, so we'll just skip over that for now. Data streams is, again, how you configure which solutions are going to get the data from our edge network. Event forwarding is a paid solution. It's not actually technically part of data collection when we talk about this suite of tools, and we're not going to talk about that today, but it's really for forwarding the data to non-Adobe solutions in real time, event-based data. Monitoring is a tool, obvious as it says, a tool for monitoring events and errors and doing validation, troubleshooting. Assurance, which I mentioned, we'll look at in a second, but for troubleshooting and validating, again, a variety of tools to make sure the data is correct and consistent, and it gets where you want it in the format that you want it, and it gets there when you want it. Schemas, identities, we'll look at in a second, but just want to sort of orient folks who have not been hands-on yet with the interface or with the Web SDK itself. One advantage of looking at the Web SDK and moving your implementation for browsers, whether it's a site or an app, is you have significant potential performance improvements. And I say potential because I have to watch what I say. Because I get emails after these presentations that says, "Hey Jeff, when you said," so I have to be careful when I say potential performance improvements. This is a very modernized SDK. It's a modernized data collection library. It takes advantage of current and recent browser features and APIs. Excuse me. Sorry. Losing my voice this week. I say potential because there's so much of the overall performance measures and what you consider a performant website or web app. It varies from customer to customer. It varies depending on your tech stack, which browser versions you have to support. Pretty wide variety of things that impact site or app or even page performance. But a lot of potential to improve performance. We've had customers make significant gains modernizing their data collection with the Web SDK. The code itself is 70% lighter on the Adobe Tech blog, which is on Medium. Excuse me. There's a white paper. There are a series of articles about the code itself. If you want to dive into that, if you have any performance improvement projects going on at work, definitely some significant ways that you can contribute using the Web SDK. To say nothing of just reducing the number of calls back and forth, requests and responses, and reducing load on the browser, and it goes on from there. More details, as I mentioned, listed on the tech blog. So the Web SDK itself is actually two different things. Sort of from a high level, there are two different versions of it, if you will. One, sorry, my first day using a computer. Can't do this PowerPoint thing. So the first version here that you see, this tags extension over here on the left, Again, tags are client-side tag management system. There is an extension in tags that allows you to deploy and manage and configure the Web SDK, and you see that card here, and we'll look at that in the UI in a few minutes. The Web SDK is also, however, a JavaScript library, and so the library, the JavaScript code itself that this extension allows you to deploy and manage can be deployed as a library. You can download the library, you can check out the wiki, etc. Learn more about it at this GitHub link that you see here, github.com/adobe/alloy. And so you don't have to use tags, our client-side tag management system. There are other vendors that supply client-side tag management systems some of our customers use, or some customers want to deploy Alloy, which is the actual code library. They want to deploy that directly in their content management system or in a client-side library that they've created themselves. So you have options. You can deploy it in tags, our Adobe's client-side tag management system, or the library itself from GitHub. So today I'll show you some examples both ways, one with the extension and one with the library. We won't go too much into looking at curly braces and semicolons, but we'll give you some examples just for those folks who are interested in deploying the code itself. A quick word about project plans. Before you dive into Web SDK, whether you're using the tags extension or the library, before you jump in, even in development or some sort of non-prod environment where, sandbox or playground that you have, plans always change, especially when it comes to implementations. Priorities change, budgets change, market factors change, customers change. That's pretty much the only thing we can all count on in this little corner of the technology world. Everybody okay and on site? Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks for the thumb. So the planning process is something that shouldn't change and shouldn't be skipped, even if it's a quick outline of step 1, step 2, step 3. The plan itself will be revised over and over again, but the thinking, the decisions that you uncover that you have to make, and side effects or impacts, especially when it comes to downstream solutions or other technologies or integrations, as I'm assuming most of you have run into at work, that the process of going through the planning to identify those things just pays off multiple times over, even if those things are adjusted and course corrected along the way. So just a quick shout that before you get into this, if you're looking to move from the analytics extension to the Web SDK or from some previous version of data collection to the Web SDK, that planning process and going through some of these resources is absolutely step 1 to discuss internally. If you're looking at a migration for your company, for an entire site or for all your sites or even for a little microsite, just having somebody internally that's the project designated as the project manager can be very helpful, if for no other reason than to ensure that communication happens both ways to all of the teams internally that need it. You've all seen this before, I'm sure, and been through this, defining your requirements, because if we're collecting data, we are collecting data for a purpose. We're not librarians. We're not just collecting data to fill up a data lake or a data warehouse or Adobe Analytics. We're collecting data because we want to be able to make more insightful decisions and take action on that data. So those requirements and the tools that we're attempting to implement, definitely step 1. The architecture of your data, data mapping, any that's necessary, your solution design, your implementation plan and timelines for non-prod and then out to prod, testing validation, pre-launch checklist, etc., all vital. If you're just going to get hands-on and sort of get a mental model for the Web SDK and see how it works on your own, obviously don't need to do a full-on project plan. But as you start to think about moving your sites, I'm a big proponent of more time spent planning and thinking, and then diving in. At the very least, making notes as you go in sort of a log format can also be helpful if you don't have time for the full planning stage. So the meat and the sandwich, implementation, sort of the reason that we're all here. But before we get into that, a few quick words about data layers. Because with the Web SDK or the Adobe Analytics extension or App Measurement as a library or the target library, when we're talking about data collection, sooner or later we're going to have a conversation about our data layer or layers. And when I say data layer, all I mean is where is the data that we're collecting at the time that we need it, and what format is it in? So data layers of something that over the past few years have become much more popular. They become more sophisticated. May have heard of event-driven data layers where the visitor does a thing and you push a value into a data layer, whether it's an object or an array, and you use that data layer to keep track as the visitor progresses through their experience of different data points. So on the left, we have a relatively flat example. When I say flat, I just mean that it's not nested too deeply. We have this, some data object. What you call it is completely up to you. And we have something equals something, right? The property page ID and a value of foo, dev, and obviously just an example. And then we have a page object with different properties, a name, URL, categories, etc. But you see that we don't get too deep into the nesting. And over here on the right, another example with my favorite pyramid of doom, where we have objects and arrays and we're all nested in there. And the reason this causes people a lot of headaches, some people feel that it's more organized to nest these things underneath in terms of levels, but then you've got to access the data. And sometimes if you have an array with a variety of values, you have an object that contains properties, some of which are arrays, and you need to loop through those or map over them. You want to avoid additional processing time and complexity when you're talking about things that are happening in the browser. We don't know if folks are on a mobile page. While they may not be in a mobile app, they might be on a device, might be 3G, might be throttled, might be a bad connection. Whatever it is, might be on an older version of a browser, and lots of factors. So the flatter your structure for a data layer, the better off you'll be, because the easier it is to collect it at the time that you need it. So in terms of steps, these are really the high-level steps in terms of getting going with the Web SDK. You handle your permissions in the different solutions, whether it's admin console or platform. You set up a schema, which is basically just a structure for the data that you'll be sending in. You may have a need for an identity namespace optionally. You'll set up a data stream to configure where that data is going to go, and then you'll get into actually configuring the Web SDK itself, whether that's the tags extension or the library. And then the client-side work begins, either in tags or your TMS of choice, or with the library itself. You'll configure your different solutions that are going to receive that data, report suite settings, etc. Do some validation and testing, QA, and then we go live in production. Some people like to have live in production first. I don't want to live that dangerously. I'm a little risk averse, but you can choose your own adventure. So for the first step, when we talk about permissions, there are some permission settings that have tripped people up in the past because they sort of they skip that step. And so you have settings for user permissions in user access and different roles in data collection, in platform itself, and then in the solution. So you see up here over on the right, this card that says launch with a little logo, and we have these permissions. This is a screenshot from our admin console, and in the launch product context, we have several areas that can be set for permissions: platforms, properties, property rights, company rights. In the documentation that tells you step by step how to set up the permissions. Again, the link for that will be in on the resources slide at the end. You just walk through that and set your permissions accordingly for your users or your user groups to enable the correct permissions for data collection. Then in platform, as the next step down here on the left, excuse me, we have different roles that most companies set up, whether you're administering a platform sandbox or you're setting up, all permissions for administrators, etc. You can make that as granular or as broad as you like. And so some of the settings are initially configured in Admin Console, but then a little bit more granular and other platform specific settings are here in the platform permissions interface, which I'll show you. And then again, last thing, over here on the bottom right corner, if you can see this, if you can see my mouse wiggling around, in Analytics, obviously, and our other solutions, you'll configure permissions as needed for specific product access. So some permissions work is probably the first thing to take a look at and make sure that's all good to go. Again, in the docs is a step-by-step data collection permissions for data collection and Web SDK, and the link will be on the end slide. What is a schema? So a schema is basically a structure. It's what I think of it as it's a way to tell Adobe Experience Platform what data you're sending, what type of data you're sending, and where that data needs to go. So for example, here we see an experience event schema. There are schemas of the experience event class, and there are also schemas for the profile class when you're working with profile data or experience event data. Generally, with the Web SDK, we're working with experience event data because we're talking about visitor behavior, right? Like I clicked a thing, I registered for a thing, I bought a thing, I added to cart, and then I bailed. Those are experience events. And so we'll generally be working with experience event schema when we're talking about Web SDK. Field groups, if you see here, this second section, not sure if you can see that, but field groups are sort of bits of a schema or pre-configured, prepackaged structures of a schema that you can add into your overall schema as needed. This one is the Adobe Analytics Experience Event full extension, which has pretty much everything a person might want to capture and send for Adobe Analytics. It also enables the automatic data collection, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. Let's see, the documentation. So this is the main data collection documentation page, just for those folks who've not seen it. Again, links at the end. But then when you get into the overview and you look at permission management, this is that first step that I mentioned. And let's see if I can find it. Where did it go? Oh, yeah. So if I go to the Web SDK documentation, which is here, this is the main overview for Web SDK. And when we look at data collection, you'll see there's a section here for Adobe Analytics. There are a pretty extensive list of data points that are automatically mapped to variables in Adobe Analytics, which is a great convenience. And this is a pretty extensive list, obviously, but you just call out that this is here. And so when you are setting up your schema, you want to reference that list of automatic data that's collected. If you use this field group that's pre-built for you, you don't have to go through each one of these things and add them or configure them or change them. You can just use them as is. And then if you have any custom needs beyond that, you can always create your own field group or add additional field groups to your schema. Again, just building a structure of when I collect some data, what type of data am I looking at, and where is that going to need to go in terms of solutions and other technologies. You can see at the beginning here all of the events, right? Event 1 to 100, 101 to 200 for all your analytics events. And as you scroll down in the UI, you'll see additional fields for your schema. Gives you a structured approach to your data collection. The Web SDK does not require XDM data for every single use case. Say that one more time. The SDK, whether you're working with the tags extension or the JavaScript library, does not require XDM formatted data for every single use case. Event forwarding is a perfect example. If you're an event forwarding customer or you're a real-time customer data platform connections customer, and you're using event forwarding can read free-form data. So, for example, if you're using Telium with UTAG.js as your data layer, and you want to send, you're collecting data with the Web SDK as the JavaScript library, and you send that in and you want to use it in event forwarding only, you can just send us the free-form data as it exists in your UTAG data model. So XDM is there for a very good foundation. It gives you a solid structure for scaling across all of your Adobe solutions. So we recommend using XDM data when you send the data, but you don't necessarily have to create a data layer in your site that is in the exact same structure and format of your XDM schema. Again, as long as it's flat enough so that you don't have to loop through it or map over it and spend a whole lot of time looking for values. There are flexible options there either way, but we do suggest sticking to the schema as much as possible just for standardization and communication across teams, etc. Then the next thing that we flip the switch on is data streams. You can enable your solutions with literally just a few clicks. So you see here in the data streams main screen, I have a data stream that I've created, and I've enabled Adobe Analytics and event forwarding and platform. And I have disabled Audience Manager and Target. And obviously every mix here will be different for each customer. You can also go in up here in the corner to edit mappings. And the mapping user interface is a way to do some data preparation, data transformations at the edge when the data stream receives the data from Web SDK. So for one example, time formats, right? Timestamps and different representations of time in terms of different syntax and standards for time values. You have something that is in an array or an object, and you just need one item, one value out of that array or that object, and so you want to map one piece of some data to a particular variable or other value, copying things over, transforming them, etc. So a variety of functions at the edge to transform your data after we receive it at the edge. So again, another way to save data prep for data collection is where that would be. It's in the data streams area. So just real quick to show you where that's at, in the data collection section where you see data streams. If I open a tab there, the data prep for data collection link over here gives you a whole list of all of the mappings and the mapping functions that are available. And you can set up your rules. So here's that schema again, and you talk about mapping from one format to another, or combining two different values into one. And there are a whole bunch of calculated fields and functions that are available for you to use there as well. So once your data stream is set up, this can be as simple as I want to turn on analytics and I want to turn on platform, and I'm done. You put in your platform data sets and you for the data stream for dev or for staging or for prod, and you put in your report suite IDs and you're done. So everything to this point can take maybe, I don't know, an hour, a few minutes, depending on your needs, or it can be very extensive depending on your needs. But for you to try it out and get your hands on the Web SDK, all of this can take just a few minutes. So I'm going to walk through real quick the configuration steps for the SDK, just for the sake of time. This is the first thing we do when we get hands-on. So once we've set up permissions, we have an idea of what our schema looks like and how it's set up, We have our plan in place, whether that's we're just going to, sort of get hands-on to get a good mental model and get the muscle memory of fingers on keyboard to play with the SDK in a non-production situation. So I'll go through this real quick, but configuration would be the first step in terms of configuring the Web SDK. Now I'm showing you the screens from our tags or launch, our client-side TMS, but you can do these same configuration operations in the library, and I'll show you an example of that after we go through these settings. But sorry. So when we configure an extension, you can have multiple instances of the Alloy data collection library, multiple instances of the Web SDK on the same page. Currently, it would be for different Experience Cloud organizations. It's most often that we see that in cases of a merger or a pending merger, but you can add an instance, as you see up here. You have an IMS org ID, an edge domain, which is typically left at this default value. And then we get into some interesting areas. So the data streams, you'll choose from a drop-down list, and you see here I have production prod is my environment, and then I have another development environment here. The name is just blurred out, but I am pointing my production environment to an actual dev sandbox, just for the sake of demonstration and to show you that you can have it configured however you like. So dev, stage, and prod, dev stage, QA, UAT, and prod, etc. But this is the mapping from your sandbox and your different environments and your data streams. So you can have a separate data stream, stream and sandbox combination for dev, and then another data stream and sandbox for staging, et cetera, as needed. But you create those mappings here. You can either, as you see, choose from a list or enter the values yourself. We get into consent and privacy. Now, this section is for configuring the Web SDK itself and how it should act when it initially loads relative to your consent management platform. So if you're using a CMP like OneTrust or something similar, what do you want the Web SDK to do until consent is either granted or not? And so that's what this setting is for. Again, you can do the same thing in the library using the Alloy commands. As a default setting means that the Web SDK will start collecting events as soon as it loads, regardless of whether or not the user provides consent and regardless of what that consent preference setting is. Out is the opposite. So events that occur, scroll, clicks, open up, an accordion, enter in values in a form, whatever the visitor interaction is that is happening, those events will be dropped unless or until the user provides consent. Pending there's a queuing mechanism that the Web SDK has so that you can queue up the events and then discard them or send them into Adobe as needed based on the consent preferences, or you can do custom code stuff in a data element. So if you want extremely granular consent settings, like for a combination of permissible purposes and vendors, which according to OneTrust, almost nobody ever clicks on the consent banner, but for the 3 people that actually do, you can provide a data element and use custom code to set those very much more granular levels of permission. But again, this is the initial configuration. What should it do when it loads? Not necessarily what it should do when someone changes their consent preference, which you can handle using the rules in tags or using your own events that you raise and the Alloy library in your TMS or your CMS. For identity, most folks will leave these checked because they're migrating from Visitor API to the Web SDK. And third-party cookies or first-party cookies, whether you're using first-party data collection or not, both of those fairly deep and broad topics. So we're just going to skim over those for the sake of time. If we're migrating target, there's a checkbox to read and write legacy mbox and some other legacy target things. There's the pre-hiding snippet for users of target that you're familiar with that you can copy out of here. And then one last thing just to call out, There we go. I can't work PowerPoint to save my life today. Sorry about that. Down at the bottom here, we have, see, that's what I mean. We have this context data. And so you can specify some or all of the context data that happens in the browser. So information about the page, the user's device, the user's browser, place context, so like city, IP address, etc., that resolve at the edge. There is data that you can be specific as to what you want Web SDK to collect and what you don't based on whatever conditions you have. And so those settings are here when you configure the Web SDK initially, or you can go back in and change it as needed. Data stream overrides is a very handy, relatively recent set of features where you set up a data stream, say it's a dev data stream or staging, and you have data going to one particular report suite. And for whatever reason, today you need a different report suite to get that data. But then tomorrow you need to go back to the other one. And so you can change quite a few settings of where the data ends up by overriding the data stream configuration. Again, you can do that here in the tags extension or in the library. For configuration in the code, you can see up here for the folks that need to work in the code itself with Alloy. Alloy takes a variety of commands and then generally returns a promise. So Alloy get library info is the name of the command that I'm passing to the Alloy object, the Alloy method, and then I'm taking the result from that command and I'm logging it out to the console is all I'm doing. The result object has a library info property, and on that property, it lists, for example, all of the commands that are available in the library, configuration settings that have been done. And so that's what I'm logging out here. This first section where you see this 9 property, the length of this object that's returned, you see append identity to URL, apply prepositions, apply response, etc. These are the commands that are available in the Alloy library. And again, just an example of executing a command and dealing with the response. And then the configuration settings that have been applied, we're listing those out with the configs property. And so you see that all down below here. So configuration being done either in tags or in the library as needed. So again, the whole point here of looking at and considering and working with Web SDK is to get data where it needs to go faster, more efficiently, securely, obviously, and with as much flexibility as we can muster. In the extension for tags or in the Alloy library itself, most often what we're going to be yeah, that didn't come out right. Need a water break. Excuse me one sec. Yeah, getting tongue-tied. We're in the home stretch, though. So anybody that's still awake, we should have a few minutes for Q&A here in just a minute. So looking at the action types for the extension, when you go into your rules in tags or launch and you set up an action configuration, the Web SDK extension supplies a variety of action types. And the 3 main action types that are most often configured is the send event, which is when you send your event with the payload of data about the visitor activity or the browser activity that just occurred. Set consent is where when a visitor has expressed their consent preferences, typically with your CMP code like OneTrust, TrustArc, etc., you can use the Web SDK to set a consent preference level. And update variable is a relatively recent type of action where you can, if you're working with XDM data, you can update the values of certain things more easily and more flexibly using that action type where you update a value at a certain point in an action. So very handy for those edge cases or for cases where you have, say, for example, I want to take an action on every page except this one, or I only want to take an action on a page or with an event if some things are true. So for those cases, the exception cases. And so over here on the right, these two code blocks, just examples, very basic examples of sending an event with the Alloy library, executing the send event command, and then at the bottom, executing the set consent command. And the set consent here uses the Adobe 2.0 standard, and the payload is structured as you see with the required attributes. For the top example, the send event, what we're sending in is information about an order. And you see purchase ID, et cetera, all the other attributes about that order that we send with the event. And when we choose the send event action, which again, probably the most often used action in the SDK itself, you have an event type that is very commonly used for a variety of purposes. You have a field for your XDM data, the data element that contains the XDM data. You also have a data field that you see here, which we'll talk about in a second, and quite a few other options. Render personalization decisions if you're using Target. Again, the data configuration overrides, setting your report suites on the fly if needed. But over here on the left, the top up here, the type, the XDM data, and the data is really the main sort of key bits to take away from when you want to send an event with the Web SDK, whether it's the library or the tags extension. You're going to have a type, an event type, and you're going to have a data payload. Generally, that data payload will be a data element if you're using launch, and it'll just be some object that you structure as needed if you're using the library. But there are two ways to send the data payload with the Web SDK: in XDM data format, which returns an object that matches your XDM schema exactly in terms of structure and type. And then the freeform data field, which where you reference a data element that returns any valid JavaScript object. So array, object, et cetera, et cetera. So the key bit of whether you send your event with XDM data or this freeform data field is, what do you want to happen to that data when it shows up at the edge? Most common example that people ask about is the data collection that we showed just a second ago for analytics, where we are working with the data that is automatically mapped to the variables that we're working with. And so when we're looking to leverage this automatic variable mapping, where we take a page name equals home, or page name equals sportswear category page, or whatever it is, and we want to map that to an analytics variable, we don't have to worry about that. The system can handle that on its own with the automatic variable mapping. But one of the requirements there is that we're sending that data in XDM format as opposed to freeform data format. Now, again, if we want to just deal with that data in the data prep mapper, where we don't want to deal with XDM data client side, that's okay. We can map that data into the format that we need for our schema in data prep. But that, because we're doing things in multiple places when we work with Mapper to transform our data that we send to the end, we want to make sure that we're noting that somewhere, that we're putting it in comments, we're putting it in a wiki, we're noting it somewhere other than our own desk, and we're communicating that to other people so that they know that the data we're collecting is in a certain format and is transformed when it hits the edge in data prep. So you have some flexibility here, but just be aware that there are some side effects or some downstream implications for sort of the approach that you choose. Part of your planning, obviously, is the structure of your data, like we talked about, and the structure of your schema. And so which one of these fields you use most often should be guided by those decisions and requirements. The type of event is also very relevant. We do a lot of decisioning at the edge based on the event type, and there are solutions that act on specific event types, but then don't act on others. If you click this little drop down, there's a variety of pre-populated event types, but you can also create your own values there to use as you see fit. So again, same thing, different view, send event action, but this is Alloy as opposed to the extension. Same type of work. Again, on GitHub is the library. And so for those folks who want to use the library in their own TMS or in the code, we're an example of a send event command, a little bit of a different format with the send event command where we create just a data layer. We have a data layer object here. This is, again, very simplified example. Excuse me, we set up a little, as an example, set up a little clone function, and we are cloning this data layer value and then passing it in as a payload under the XDM property with your send event command. So some flexibility there in how you handle that. And then over on the right, again, another example with a configuration override for in case you want to override the data stream to send to a different report suite temporarily, etc. Again, everything that you see that you can do in the tags extension, you can also do in the library itself. Just a question of how you choose to format that code. And last step is validation, troubleshooting, QA, the Experience Platform Debugger Chrome extension, also for Firefox, I believe. Excuse me. Is a great tool to get out of the dev tools, get out of the network request panel, and get some additional information about your implementation. You see here just a quick summary screen about the Web SDK, what's installed on this particular example site that I set up. And then we see our network requests here in the Platform Web SDK section. We also have sections for other tools and systems that give you more detailed information relative to those solutions. And so here we see a detail of the network request. You can click into any of these and it'll pop up with a detailed view for a real handy tool. In the log section for any event forwarding customers, any folks who have real-time customer data, excuse me, real-time customer data platform connections or Prime or Ultimate, otherwise known as RT-CDP, Connections, Prime, or Ultimate. In the log section under Edge, once you sign in, you'll see log lines here in time order. Each one has a timestamp. It says log level. There's a request ID for the specific request, and allows you to inspect traffic that happens at the edge, which is extremely handy for when you're trying to validate and troubleshoot things that you can't see in the browser. So definitely recommend checking out the debugger, if for no other reason than the edge trace functionality. Very handy. Resources, this will be we'll post the deck someplace where you can access it, and you can get these links, and we'll post them here in the chat pod in just a second. But these are pretty much all the links that I referenced when I was putting this together. So these are all available. We also have the community link is the last one. And so if you have questions about anything we covered today, you don't forget about or you think about after, feel free to ask in the community. And we can follow up with you, make sure connect you with the right people. So that is it for the 6,000 slides. Let's see if I can get back to the meeting. If anybody has questions, I know we're a little bit over, so if anybody has a hard stop, feel free to drop. We can follow up with more info, but I'm going to stop sharing here just for a second, just so I can paste the links. And if anybody has questions, feel free to just, I guess, unmute. Chase, if you want to handle that however you see fit.
Yeah, it looks like we have a few questions in the chat. I need to make my screen a little bit bigger for you.
Let me get to the chat here.
Okay, this is Kranti. I think I have asked the question in the chat. So the question is, like in XDM schema, when we are designing, we have some fields and we map data type with either string, integer, like that. Okay, after implementation, if we realize that, okay, we want to change the data type, I think XDM schema is not allowing. So the alternative solution is like, again, create a new field, change the data element, remap everything. So is there any other alternative solution to this situation?
When do you need the data element value to change?
For example, take confirmation ID. So we have mapped it as an integer. So some confirmation IDs will be having strings. So later when you realize that, okay, the string as a confirmation ID should be string, not the integer. So now what is the solution for that? Because the code is already in the production and we don't have the option to change that particular field.
So you're collecting it as, let's just say, an integer, and it needs to be a string, or the other way around, and you need to transform it before it hits analytics.
Correct.
Okay, so a couple ways you can do that. If you can't touch the client-side implementation, and you're stuck with collecting it in the format that it's in, so if you're collecting an integer, sorry, excuse me. If you're collecting it as an integer and you're stuck, it's an integer, you can't change it for now, but you need it to be a string, or the other way around, you can use data prep for data collection, which is in the data streams section of our documentation, and you can map that and convert it from an integer to a string, or whatever format that you need. You can concatenate it with another value, change the case, whatever it is that you need. But if you're stuck and you can't touch the data, you can't alter it at the point of data collection, and you just need to transform it before it hits an Adobe solution, data prep would be where I would suggest that you do that.
Gotcha. Thank you. And
yep.
What happens if we drop that field, okay, and or create a new one? So what will be the impact of it? What will be the impact to the whole XDM as an object?
So in other words, if you remove a field from the payload?
Yes. Yes.
The rest goes through. You can be as precise excuse me, altering one property, or more precisely, altering one value, it doesn't impact the rest of the properties of the payload.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. And I think we had where is the best place to configure iterations of a dimension? Schema, launch processing rules, derived field, page URL, clean URL, all could be best of same thing. If Jill's still on, if you could maybe give me some context. I'm sorry, I'm not smart enough to know. I don't think I follow.
So setting up the XDM schema, would you just create a data element for full URL, URL without any query params? I know there's one in there for capturing specifically the query params. It seems like there's multiple places you could do that. We often do that in the past in launch to, basically populate in Adobe Analytics world 3 EVARs. But if we're talking CJA and event forwarding, do we want to capture 3 values per page, or do we want to manipulate that data later on so that there's less in the data lake?
Okay, so I think you have a couple different decision points or criteria there in that. I don't think it's like yes, no, left, right. So my personal approach at the point of data collection is to say, for example, your URL example, right? Like I would just say grab the whole thing and then parse it when you need it, would be my advice, as opposed to creating multiple data elements that grab the specific piece of what you need. I'm more of the belief that you collect as much at the time that it's available as you can, because timing issues, order of operations, network connections, etc. I mean, there's a long list of things that can impact. So I say get it while the getting's good. And so, for example, like if you're going to create a data element to hold page data, let's just say, I would put as much as feasible for the requirements in the one data element, and then work with it as needed from there, would be my suggestion. I'm not sure that answers your question, though.
It kind of feels like it answers it 2 ways. So if we're grabbing the full URL in the web page data element, So it would have the entire string, and then later on, you recommend parsing out the different pieces of it to clean it up? Or you
So
recommend
that
capturing 3 different elements at the start?
So for me, I prefer to deal, just for me personally, I prefer to deal with fewer data elements than more granular data elements. Excuse me. Your team, your requirements may be that you need separate data elements for pieces of a thing, like a URL, right? The different parts of a URL, whether you have domain, you have the query string parameters, you have a specific query string parameter, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the other thing to think about is what is that data for and where is it going? So if you have whether it's a piece, a property of your data layer, or this is a safe space. We're all friends here, so I'm just going to say it. Let's just say that just randomly, because you don't have a certain value in a data layer, maybe you're scraping the DOM for a certain value. I know nobody actually does that, but just hypothetically, in case anybody had a need to do that, wherever your data comes from, I always think, okay, what is the data we need? Where do we need it, and when do we need it, and what format do we need it in? And if it's available in terms of as the visitor activity occurs, as that data becomes available, I would collect it right away. And so for the URL example, I would put it in one data element, and then I know I have the entire thing with all query string params and hashes and everything else, and then I can just take the bits as I need them, where I need them, when I need them. But if you need you need 3 different pieces of it all at the exact same time for 3 different reasons, then that, you might want to think about 3 different data elements. But generally speaking, I prefer implementations with fewer data elements rather than more.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Jeff, I know that we are pretty over time here. So what I'm thinking is we can create a thread out on Experience Leading community, and we can connect offline and get these questions answered for everybody, and get something posted out there that I'll be able to send out to the group.
Yeah, sounds good. Looks like they got a lot of pizza to eat too, so they better get busy.
There's a lot left. We'll send it to you.
Come next time to the office and have pizza.
That's right.
Definitely,
Thank
definitely.
you, Jeff.
Yeah,
Thanks for your time,
and I
Jeff.
hope everybody got something useful, valuable out of the time, and hope you guys do. I want to see empty pizza boxes. Nate, I want you to send me a picture with all those empty boxes. But thank you to all folks who joined in person and remotely. Hope you found something valuable, and I'll work with Chase to get that community page set up and get that information out to you all for follow-up. But thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. And thanks again, Nate, Justin, for being in person. And thank you guys for showing up. Like Jeff said, I'm expecting pictures of empty pizza boxes, but if not, Justin's going to look real nice in the Lehigh office, sending out some pizza to everybody.
That's right. He'll hand some out.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody. We'll chat soon.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Bye.